Hi and welcome to the launch of Kids Central Online. We're continuing with our theme of Jesus' miracles, and by that we mean not just the many miracles Jesus performed in the Bible and all the Bible stories we've been doing, but also the miracles he does in all of our lives, even today, and will continue to do. So we're going to learn about the loaves and the fishes, and that's a miracle of multiplication where he took a little boy's lunch and he multiplied the bread and the fish to feed thousands and thousands of people, and there was food left over, like 12 basketfuls of food. So he's a miraculous God, and he does miracles all the time and for many, many people. We're also doing Daniel in the lion's den. Now this is a miracle of protection. So we're going to focus a little bit about the protection thing, and we're also going to have a story from today as well, and that's from Grandma Maybeth, of a little baby and her parents who are in hiding in China for their lives. And this is a great story of protection, how God protected them miraculously. But coming up first, let's have the story of the loaves and the fishes. This is read from the Rhyming Bible by Grandma Jan.
Hi, I'm Jan, and I'd like to share one of my favourite Bible stories with you. This story is called Lunch to Share. A boy once asked permission to go and hear Jesus talk. "I'm sure it won't be far," he said, "and I'll be glad to walk." His mum agreed, and then she said, "You better take a lunch, for when a boy gets hungry, he needs some food to munch." Into a basket went 5 loaves, and next to them 2 fish. It was as nice a little lunch as any boy could wish. "Goodbye," he said, and scampered off to join the happy throng. His mother waved and called to him, "Now don't be gone too long." The little boy saw many things too wonderful to tell. He saw how Jesus healed the lame and made the sick ones well. But when the sun was sinking low, he heard kind Jesus say, "Go and feed this hungry crowd and don't send them away." But Philip said, "It can't be done. This crowd's too large to feed. We'd have to have a lot of cash to buy the bread we need." And that is when the little boy tugged at Andrew's hand and pointed to the basket that was sitting in the sand. "If you please, it isn't much, but I will gladly share." So Andrew went to Jesus and set the basket there. Jesus took the little lunch and told the crowd to sit. Then after he had given thanks, he broke it into bits. They passed around the pieces till everyone was full, and when they'd gathered what was left, they had 12 baskets full.
This is the story of how God used something small to do something great. Our story begins with Jesus. He was in the countryside, and people came from far and wide to listen as he taught the word of God. The crowd grew till it was great. The day started getting late, but there was one thing that they all forgot. Food! Nobody brought food, and everyone was hungry, but there were too many people to just go out and buy some. So they asked Jesus what to do. Jesus said, "What do you have?" The 12 disciples started asking people in the crowd if they had food. They found some, but it wasn't much. A little boy had brought his lunch, and he gave it for the Lord to use. Yeah, he gave his lunch for the Lord to use. He had 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. There was no way that would feed all those men. But Jesus had a plan. He took the fish and loaves of bread, held them up over his head, and blessed the food, giving thanks to God. The food began to multiply, and soon every girl and guy ate all they could. It tasted so good, and there were tons of leftovers for everyone, especially him. The little boy gave what he had. It wasn't much to him, but to Jesus it was infinitely, absolutely, positively huge. And that's the story of how Jesus used 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread to feed thousands of people.
Hey kids, today we're talking about one of the most famous stories in the Bible.
It's about a young man who stood up for God even when everyone was against him.
His name was Daniel. He was one of God's people, and he was living in a foreign country ruled by King Darius.
He was smart and strong, probably good looking.
Probably. Look at me.
But the most important thing about him was that he loved God, and God was with him.
Because of that, Daniel became super successful.
So successful that King Darius put him in charge of everything.
And that's where the story gets interesting.
A bunch of the king's men got jealous at Daniel, so they made a plan to take him down.
They knew that Daniel would never break the rules, so they had to find a way to change them.
They convinced the king to make a rule that no one could pray to God anymore.
Daniel followed the rules, except the ones that went against God. Let's think about this in our lives. When your teacher says no talking, do you keep talking? Or when she says clean up your area, do you leave it messy? I hope not.
But what if one day they said you weren't allowed to pray anymore?
What would you do then? Well, that's the situation that Daniel was in.
He had a tough decision to make, but he decided to obey God instead of man.
But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down, as usual, in his upstairs room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God.
Daniel made the right choice, but sometimes bad things happen even when you make the right choices.
Daniel got thrown to the lions, even though he did nothing wrong. Because Daniel broke the law and kept praying, he got thrown into the lion's den. I bet that was pretty scary.
Now, I don't know about you, but my school doesn't throw me into a lion's den every time I pray.
But a mean kid might point fingers at you for praying at lunch.
And that can feel just as scary as staring down a lion.
But Daniel did it, and so can you. God stood with Daniel among the lions. Even though Daniel was in the den surrounded by lions, they didn't eat him.
They didn't attack him or anything because God protected him.
Memory verse! Not a scratch was found on Daniel, for he had trusted in his God.
That day, Daniel showed everyone how powerful God is.
So kids, take a lesson from Daniel.
Follow the rules, but most importantly, follow God.
Hello everyone, I'm really excited to tell you a story about my grandfather and my grandmother. They used to live in England, but they travelled a long time ago. They travelled from England all the way to China because they wanted to go to China as missionaries to tell people about Jesus. And here I have a little model of my grandpa and my grandma dressed up in their Chinese clothes. When they settled in China, they were very happy and they were getting ready to share about Jesus with all the people. And a really good thing happened when they had a little baby. And here's grandma holding the little baby in her arms. Her name was Nora. And little baby Nora was just 6 weeks old. Everything was going really well when suddenly they got some really bad news. something very dangerous was happening. They were warned that there was a group of men who wanted to kill all the missionaries who had come to China. These men called themselves the Boxers, and they were very strong and very brave. One day, at 5 o'clock in the morning, Grandpa received urgent news that the Boxers were coming to attack their family. The Chinese friends told them that they needed to climb over the wall into the garden of a neighbor who had been helped by missionary doctors and said he would be willing to help protect them and hide them from the Boxers. So they had to climb over this big 10-foot wall, get into the neighbor's property, and the neighbor said that he had a big barn on the back of his property, and they could go in there, climb up a ladder, go through a trapdoor, and find themselves somewhere where they could lie on the floor and hide from the Boxers. It was very hot and very dusty in there, and they were worried about this baby. Nora was only 6 weeks old, and you know how babies cry when they're hungry, and there wasn't much food and there wasn't much water. The Boxers would hear her for sure if she made a noise. Well, they tried to hide and tried to be quiet, but soon they knew that the Boxers had arrived on the property, and they were searching everywhere. They tried looking in the windows. They tried to come up the ladder and get through the trapdoor. They tried to look through the cracks. They even prepared firewood so they could burn the whole building down. Grandpa and Grandma and baby Nora had to hide in this hot, dusty attic for 6 days, almost a whole week. And they were very worried about baby Nora crying. But do you know what? In that whole time, baby Nora never cried, not even one time. And Grandpa told everyone afterwards, the God who shut the mouth of the lions for Daniel shut the mouth of our little baby so that she did not cry. Baby Nora, she grew up and she was a healthy child. She became a missionary in China as well. And my middle name is Nora in memory of her. Isn't that lovely?
I just want to tell you about some of the small, everyday miracles that are all around us. Today, I went for a walk and I was counting all the different colours of green around us. I counted 28. Why don't you go for a walk and see how many different greens you can see on the way? And on the way, I saw an apple tree. Do you know how many seeds there are in an apple? Somebody planted a seed and it grew into a big tree, and this apple came off the tree. Well, I'm going to cut the apple. And we'll count how many seeds are in the apple. And this apple, I cut some of them in half, so we'll have to count that as one. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 seeds in this apple. Now, if we take the seeds and plant each seed in the garden, and each seed grows into a tree, how many apples do you think we'll have? Well, God does his miracles every day when people plant seeds and they grow into these amazing apples that we can eat.
How many times a day would you say that you eat? 2 times? 3 times? 4 times? The thing about food is you can only go so long without eating it. If you don't eat food for a long period of time, eventually you will start to get weaker and weaker until you starve. But on the flip side of that, if you eat healthy food, you will become stronger and healthier. We all need food, otherwise we starve. In the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, I'm sure those people felt like they were starving. They had been following Jesus around all day, and it was getting pretty late. So by that point, they were probably really hungry. You might get super hungry if you even miss one meal, so we can only imagine how these people must have felt. And 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish split 5,000 ways doesn't seem like it would be a very fulfilling meal, but that's what Jesus had. And so, he prayed over it and he started passing it out. And then, to everyone's surprise, he kept passing out more. And he passed out some more. And he kept passing out this food until over 5,000 people were full and they couldn't eat anymore. Talk about an incredible miracle. Jesus is absolutely amazing. He was able to take a little boy's lunch and use it to feed thousands. Not long after Jesus had multiplied the fish and bread for the thousands of people, Jesus told all of those following him something very important. In John 6:35, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." Jesus said that he is the bread of life. Now, when you first hear that, it can sound kind of weird, because it's kind of odd that someone says that they're like bread. But what does that mean for us? Well, in the same way that your stomach gets hungry, your spirit gets hungry too. But they don't sell spirit food at the store, so how are we supposed to feed our spirit? What Jesus is saying in this verse is that when you spend time with him, it's like you are eating food. Every time you pray, it's like you are eating that spiritual food. Every time you read the Bible, it's like you're eating more of that food. And every time you live how Jesus taught you all to live, it's like you are eating that spiritual food. Our spirits get hungry, and the only thing that can feed them and make them strong is Jesus. Jesus is the one we need. We need to spend time with Jesus because he is the bread of life. Most people eat 3 times a day because we need food to survive. You could go a little while without food, but if you do, you aren't going to be very strong. Just like your body needs food, your spirit needs food to be strong as well. If we don't spend time with Jesus, we are starving ourselves spiritually, and that makes us spiritually weak. So, how often do you spend time with Jesus? Maybe you need to spend more time praying, more time reading God's word, or more time living how you know in your heart that Jesus would want you to live. We wouldn't go days without eating real food, so why would we ever go days without the more important spiritual food? Jesus is the bread of life, the only one who could ever sustain us spiritually. So spend time with him. Maybe for you, your spirit is literally starving. You've never chosen to follow Jesus, and you've never experienced the bread of life. Your next step is to choose to follow Jesus and join God's family, because he is the only one who will ever satisfy you.